All right, so today we're talking about flagstone hexagons. And so we've got these hexagons separated by these teeny tiny little 1 grid spacing wide little channels. And we're going to have basically the hexagons and the triangles on alternate sides as close together as they can go. So I've got a 24-fold triangle grid on a hexagon here. This one was probably done on 16-fold, so we'll get a little bit more than this while we fold together. So for starters, we're going to put in an open hexagon on our paper. And since I have my triangle grid on a hexagon, that means that my mountain fold is going to hit 1 spacing up from the right hand side corner. And I'm going to go around adding new pleats, laying down on top of the space for the pleat that I just put in. And they're all going to have the same interaction with the edge of the paper. And I'm going to also make sure back here that my paper stays roughly cone shaped, so that I have an easier time adding in my new pleats. And I'm building up this puffy star shape. So zoom in on that. And I want to make sure that I can get all of those pleats into place, keeping them all with the same relationship with the edge. And then for squashing, we're just gonna press from the top to squash. So I'm going to get my open hexagon, and what I'm going to do, since we don't have particularly much grid, I'm going to show how to do this next ring around the center the same way I would do a further repeat out. So that means that I'm going to be setting up 2 triangles that feed into the next hexagon, and then move on to the next place where I want to put a hexagon after squashing those 2 triangles. So flipping over, what I'm going to need here is that the tip of my triangle is going to be right at the open hole of the hexagon, and it's actually going to make that hole a little bigger. So just like we saw 2 weeks ago with the first method of flagstone squares, I'm going to have my valley right along this folded mountain, and then my mountain 1 spacing further. And we're just setting up this hexagon. We're not folding it all the way. And the side that I want to keep, so if I was to set it up the whole way, it would look like this. And instead of doing that, I'm going to let this portion flatten out, and I'll set up the next triangle on the pleat that's sitting underneath here. So I've got the side that's going to feed into the hexagon in the correct orientation, and then the free pleat can lay flat. Then when I do the same thing on that pleat sitting underneath, so valley right next to this folded mountain, mountain 1 spacing further out. On this one, I'm running this mountain up under, and I'm letting it go just 2 grid spacings before it hits that valley, and let that stay in place. So what I'm doing with this one is bringing it in, letting this short pleat be in the correct orientation, and then my other pleat going out to the corner is going to flop over the other way. You see that valley is laying on top. Eventually we're going to get that straightened out. Then flipping the paper over top to bottom, I can see that I've got 2 points of my hexagon star. And I can know that those are the 2 points because they're right at the corners of my existing hexagon. So what I need to do from here is make sure that everything else stays in place while I bring up the remaining pleats of my new hexagon. And in this case, that's going to mean a double depth pleat in here. So we already had this single depth from the triangle being set up. We're going to add a second pleat on top of that. And then we can get the rest of our hexagon set up. Notice here I've got the double depth on top of a single depth, and on this side I also have double depth on top of single depth. So that is the setup for this hexagon, and then I'll go ahead and squash. And flipping the paper back over so that second hexagon is down towards me, I can now flip the free pleat of each of my triangles to squash them. So this is the connection that's between each of our hexagons. So we could really go around in either direction from here. I'm going to choose to go this way. There's just a little intuition that that's going to be a bit easier. And so I'm going to have this same triangle coming under here. This time we already have this closest triangle. So we're setting up one in here, trying to get that open so it's not snarled in the middle. And just like we did this one last time, we're going to let that mountain go 2 spacings and run into the pocket there. That one's going to need to be in the correct orientation, so the pleat running out to the edge is going to need to fold over flat. And at this point, we've got some 3D-ness in here that we can't resolve just yet. Then we're going to come over to the right-hand side. So we got a triangle on one side of this new hexagon going in. We need another triangle on the other side. And one thing that we can notice with these 2 triangles is that their corners are like half a grid spacing from where the other one covers the pleat. So if we look out this way, I'm going to want that corner, and I'm going to mark it with the valley fold that's going to go next to it. I want that corner 1/2 of a spacing out from where the existing triangle covers the pleat, and I'm going to need a valley out in this direction. So what I need to do is open the pleat from the existing triangle so I can pop down that valley, and I need to be careful that I don't erase the good work that I already did. And then I can set up the triangle on top, And this pleat going down into where we're forming our next hexagon needs to stay in place, and the other pleat can lay down flat, causing a double depth pleat. Now notice that I haven't run this pleat all the way out, and that's because I'm going to need to really just run it 2 grid spacings. I'm starting to see my puffy star in the center here. So I know that this mountain needs to just go to that point. So with my 2 triangles on either side, I'm going to flip the paper over, set up my remaining pleats for the hexagon, making sure to keep my triangle setups in place. And once I've got that, so I'm going to have a double depth pleat in here and also in here, corresponding to those 2 places where I've set up triangles. And then I can squash that new hexagon and flip back to flip the free pleats of those 2 triangles and squash them too. So next we're going to go around in exactly the same way. What I'm going to do is go around the central hexagon. Doesn't look very central on the paper as a whole at the moment, but once we get around, it will again. And I'll start by removing this pleat from underneath, setting up where that triangle needs to be, and then laying down that triangle as a 3-way intersection with this kind of gap between the hexagons in the correct orientation. Then I'll take this pleat from the existing triangle and I'm going to pop it down 1 spacing from the corner so I can set up a new triangle on top, and this is going to cause a double depth pleat in here because my free pleat is laying over. So now I've got these 2, and I went ahead and put in this valley because I know I'm going to need it for the hexagon. I've got these 2 triangles that are set up but not squashed, and then I'll flip and finish putting in my hexagon, noticing that this pleat going this way is going to cause a double depth pleat with the pleat from the triangle that I had set up there. And squash. And this is a general method for adding hexagons, no matter how much repeat, how many repeats you're going to have. So then I flip over and squash these triangles again. Or I guess they're new triangles, but same motion. And down here, we're getting into some denser territory. And I'm going to, well, not directly add to it right now, but by the time we come and squash, it will be adding to the density. So that one's got to come in like this. And this one is popping there. And notice that these 2 mountains are 1 grid spacing apart from each other before I let this pleat fold over into the double depth. So that was my reference for that fold. And once again, I'm only letting this mountain go 2 spaces before it dives down, which makes it easier when I flip over to set up the pleats for my hexagon. And squash. Yeah, so we're definitely going to be getting more on this grid than I got on my sample piece. We're coming on along and we have quite a bit more to add further out. And flipping over, I'm going to squash these 2 triangles, and this is really dense in here. Lots of layers. So we're coming around and I want to get all of my twists in here, with preferably without running pleats through things that I wouldn't have to. So the first one I'm going to do is bring out this one in the middle. What I'm going to do, I'm going to let everything under it stay closed. I'm going to set it up. And if I was to squash this twist right now, I'd have multiple layers bound up in the middle, and that would not be something I want. But since I'm not going to squash it yet, I don't really care. So I can kind of bring it in as best as I'm able while I set up this one in here. And flipping over, let's see if we can get our whole hexagon without reordering things. And it turns out the answer is no, but not by much. So if we just like blindly set up our hexagon, we would have this and we would be squashing on top of things. And I'm going to go ahead and squash the edges that aren't involved with that in case that becomes useful. And then I'm going to flip over and see what we can unbind. See if we can unbind this a bit. Ah, here's the technique that I need. So the mountain folds for this triangle are these 3. And I'm going to need a valley through here. So I'm going to pop this down, and this is still going to be a bit tricky because it looks like I might need to have this triangle fully standing while I'm trying to squash my hexagon. But it's not going to be really that bad. And it might be something where it works out better if I go in the opposite direction. So let's see what we can figure out by just shifting stuff around. So I've got those 3, and then I'm splitting one spacing out, splitting again. And I know that if I were to do this, and my hexagon was fully in place, this would be standing up flat, and it would be able to squash that triangle. So let's see from the other side what we can do with our hexagon. So I want to have hexagon fully in place based on those pleats that I have. Let's see what else we can get to happen. And really at this point, I can do a bit of folding in the air and get those other edges of the hexagon that I couldn't before. So that's a good solution for this situation. And then flipping over, in order to get this fully in place, I'm either going to have to fold through. Yeah, I think fold through the hexagon is the best bet. So what I've got here is the three-way intersection for my triangle. One spacing out, it splits into three, and this pleat is going to go through that hexagon I just put in. And then down here, it splits into three again. This is the compound wrap, tucking up under the existing triangle. Luckily, with these open hexagon twists, once they're squashed, the grid lines are still aligned with the background, so it doesn't actually hurt them to fold through the middle. So that was the tricky triangle of the group. Let's get the other one. So on that first ring around, it's really hard to tell what direction you should be going until you get most of the way around and you hit something like this. So for our next hexagon, we want to open this back up, unfold that pleat that was going through the center of that hexagon, unlock this pleat, and bring it all the way back in here to set up that three-way intersection. And then I'm going to pop this mountain from the existing triangle down one spacing out and set up my new triangle with the double depth pleat, and this mountain going just two spacings. Then I'll flip over and finish setting up this hexagon. And squash the new twist. I'll take this opportunity to go over the previous one with the bone folder as well. And flip back and squash those two triangles that I had left set up. Okay, so we've been working around this way, clockwise, but I have a hypothesis that it'll actually be easier to work counterclockwise based on how this triangle ended up. So let's test that. Next ring around the center, we'll go counterclockwise. This one setting up in here, and then this I'm going to pop and set up. I need to untuck this pleat from under this triangle to set up the double depth. Now, isn't that nicer? And flip over to find the rest of the hexagon. And squash. And flip, and I'll squash these two triangles. Doesn't always look like it's going to be nicer, but you gotta listen to the paper. And so from here, I'm going to pull out this pleat from underneath to set up the new triangle here, and then new triangle over here. And this is going to run a pleat up through existing twists, but we know from before that it's going to do that anyways. So you may as well do it on the twists that are already folded and not the one that you're trying to fold right now. And then flip the paper. And this is running a quite crunchy pleat through, okay, doesn't crunch as much. Just fold it over like that. Okay. And here I have a choice whether I'm going to tuck this flap in, choosing not to. I can get the rest of my pleats in place. And this is getting close to the edge on my grid. And that's the edge right there. And flipping back over, I'm going to squash this triangle. Notice I really kept a hold of this little flap on the edge while I was puffing that triangle out, because that is definitely at risk of shifting. So here's where it gets crunchy in here, but I really just need to enforce that fold right up close to the triangle. And then I'm immediately going to release the pleat underneath to form a new triangle, and this pleat above is going to open up so I can put in another new triangle. And I'm really going through and adding 2 triangles for each new hexagon. And that is really the whole story. Where it gets crunchy out here is deciding like how much I'm willing to fold through existing twists, which in this case is actually the best option that we have. And then flip over and squash the new triangles. And now I'm going to pull this pleat from underneath to set up this triangle. And this is going to be the crunchy one where I'm now running this mountain through existing twists, many existing twists, and folding that over towards the center. And then I'm going to flip over, and one of my pleats from the rest of the hexagon is also going to run down through stuff, and this would be more extreme if I had more repeats. So I'm going to get this all in place and squash, being extra careful there where I meet the edge of the paper. And notice that I'm not being super strict about these pleats that are going through everything. I'm not really mashing them down. I'm just getting them flat enough that I can fold my stuff, and pay attention here on this corner. I'm going to hold down firmly while I squash the rest of this triangle. And then this one, I'm going to come and tuck over this other pleat. And I'm really just mashing down right in here. to get it to be in the right position to squash. And then I'm pretty immediately opening up these pleats that are running through everything else. And getting the next triangles in place. Then I'll flip over and get the rest. And flip over and squash the triangles. And this process will repeat the rest of the way around the paper. So I'm going to pull out this pleat underneath, setting up this triangle, and then this one is going to cause all kinds of folds through existing twists. It's going to fold in towards the center, and flipping over, I'm going to have another pleat from the hexagon that kind of goes in towards existing stuff, although it doesn't, at this repeat, have to really crunch through things. Get that corner nicer. And flip. And squash. And squash the other. Again, this is crunchy, but I'm not really focusing on folding all the way through because both of those pleats are going to be undone in the next step. So you can kind of see here where if I had more repeat, and we'll see this on the last edge, that this would be running through, like the second one on this edge would also have pleats running through existing pleats. I just ran out of twists for it to run through. And so I can get away with without the pleat running through existing stuff in this repetition. And grab some water. So we've got 2 edges left. On that final edge, I do expect more pleats running through stuff than we've seen thus far. So squashing these triangles, going to be adding 2 more hexagons to this edge. So the first ring around the center, we were adding 1 hexagon to each edge, then moving on and exactly repeating. This time we're adding 2 hexagons to each edge. The final side we will be adding 3. And then basically the final side of each ring around the center is a preview of the next ring around the center. each time you add another ring, you're doing another hexagon per side. And flip back, can squash my twists. That's awkward. Okay, there we go. And I will go ahead and fold the partial twists at the edge for you too. So now I need another twists in here. And notice the pleat management up here. I've got this pleat tucked under a triangle. This triangle I needed to tuck down so I could get the double depth going on top of it. And coming on over, I'll get my next hexagon. And squash. Yeah, at least the hexagons are easy to squash. That's kind of the only easy thing about this tessellation, that the individual twists are easy to squash. And let's see, so I've got 1, 2, 3 triangles lined up here. I am expecting to have 2 rounds of pleats going through existing twists. So I'm bringing this up, folding straight through everything. So you'll see in next week's stream a case where folding straight through everything is not such a good solution. And then flipping over, now the other pleat from the hexagon is also going to fold straight through some stuff, including this stack of pleats here. And you need to make sure that that triangle is still happy in there before I can get the rest of everything. And flipping back, need to squash both of these triangle twists. And then this time when I put in those next 2 triangles, I'm still going to have this pleat running through existing twists. Looks like it runs through on the same line as the previous hexagon did. I've got that set up, flipping over, and here got that same line from the hexagon, acting like the first twist of previous edges. Basically coming over and here and I can choose to tuck or not tuck. And then coming on out, flipping back over rather, I can squash these two new triangles, and I've got one more hexagon to go with its two triangles to resolve all of this mess. So working on that bottom pleat first, setting up the triangle, and coming around, and instead of skipping one and going to the next, I'm going to go around until I find a place for a new triangle. That's going to go right here. And flipping over, I can squash that new hexagon. I did move a little bit without talking when I set up this pleat from the other side. And that gets me all around this loop, and I can squash those two new triangles right here. And I'm free to go around and get whatever partial twists I can on the edge. And in this case, I'm going to get a little bit here, a little bit here. These are both going to be half triangles, and I could wait to squash them until I get the hexagon on the other side, but since it's so close to the edge, I may as well just go ahead and do it. And then flipping over, I get this very partial hexagon over here. And I don't have enough grid to do anything here. So it's exactly the same on the other 6 edges, or other 5 rather, on each of the 6 edges. Gonna have these two partial triangles that set up my partial hexagon on the other side. And flipping over, gonna get that triangle, gonna get the other triangle, and I'm holding the pleats that are moving around on the back in ways that enable me to have a flat surface to fold each of these triangles, but it's not the same way for each one. And then I can squash that little partial hexagon. I'm using that 1 pleat width measure to set up this triangle. And this one is already basically set up already. And add the hexagon. And I've got 2 more to go. So I'm setting up these partial hexagons. And at the end, I'm going to show you a preview of what we're going to do next week. Just a little more to go. And this is the last one. So partial triangle 1, partial triangle 2, and I will say flagstones, while I have done them, they are not really my area of expertise. There are other folders who are much more proficient at them, but I find that my style of folding does work nicely, even on certain flagstones. So this is the finished hexagon flagstone tessellation on a 24-fold triangle grid on a hexagon. And let's take a look at something else that we can do. So this one might initially look like it's the same hexagon, but it's actually a more open hexagon. So it's a double open hexagon so that it matches with the open triangle there. You can see that little triangle in the center, which means that we've got that open triangle, got the double open hexagon, which gives us a lot more space to work with. So this is not a simple triangle, it's taking in 4 pleats, and that's what I'm going to introduce next week. So happy folding, everyone.